What's up, everybody? Another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we got Pete McGrain. He's a filmmaker, journalist. He did one of my favorite documentaries, one that I recommend a lot, called Ethos, with Woody Harrelson hosted or narrates it. I don't know how you want to put it, but definitely check it out. It's on Netflix. It's on. It might be online. I'm sure it's on Hulu and a bunch of other places. So definitely check it out. We're going to talk about some of the topics that movie hits and some of the issues that it talks about, from our problem with money in media and money in war being profitable and all these other things, and get into what motivated him to do this movie and any other projects he has going on. So I just want to thank Pete for being with us today.
Hi, Ricky. How are you? Nice to be here.
Hey, thanks for taking your time to be with us. And
Sure.
how did you come up with the idea of Ethos and the whole idea of trying to capture today's social issues and kind of the root of the issue? Because you don't just talk about the issues, but you really get into the psychology of it, and how media and corporations have learned how to use I'm not even sure the word I'm looking for, but basically like
Yeah.
tricks to brainwash people and really like affect not our choices just by saying, hey, here's some information, now make a logical decision, but also how to affect our emotions and I guess influence our decision making that way and all those things. So how did you come up with this? Was this your first documentary, or did you do others and then this just came about, or what's the story, Pete?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there,
Yeah,
Ricky.
sorry, sorry about that.
Let me start back. Yeah, I'm from Ireland.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, an occupation, a British occupation force in the north of Ireland for many years, and of course, so I'm very political by nature, and I think most Europeans are more engaged as an average politically because they've had lots of wars in Europe for a long, long period, and politics is it really affects people's lives. So I guess that would be the beginning of why I'm engaged politically. And and I guess like you, I'm a big fan of documentaries, and I've seen dozens and dozens of documentaries, and I'll explain in a minute. You'll find Ethos. There was a lot of clips from some of my favorite documentaries in Ethos. Uh, for me, when I look at what we're capable of as a race, when I look at the chip in your smartphone has probably got more processing capacity than they had when they put the first man on the moon, if they put the first man on the moon.
Yeah.
We're capable we're incredibly capable, and yet then I look at the world the way it is, and our world's built up of systems, social systems, banking systems, the media, all of the things, all of the expressions of humanity. And I see this massive gap between what we're capable of and what we've actually created. And so that's a conundrum for me. It's a puzzle for me. And so when I look at the world, I'm trying to fathom how it works. And of course, documentaries from Adam Curtis's film, The Century of the Self, which I think is probably the most important film ever made. And if anybody out there is listening and hasn't seen it, track it down and see the whole film. There's links to it on the Ethos website. So I'm watching these documentaries, and I'm seeing all of these connections then between different documentaries. Adam Curtis's film talks about the onset of mind control using the media, and it's fascinating how that came about, because they apparently stumbled into this way of not only making wonderful consumers out of people, so we'd buy their garbage, but they discovered that when you stimulate people's desires and satisfy them through consumerism, you're really pacifying them. And if you can keep them above screaming level, they'll pretty much do what you want. So how that then relates to another area of our lives, if you look at the military-industrial complex, they sell weapons. The guy who makes umbrellas prays for rain. So we know that massively powerful corporations that build weapons are in a position to affect foreign policy in a way that positively affects their bottom line. And you have to wonder, well, okay, this guy's talking out of his hat. Nobody would cause a war to make money. If you start putting the pieces together, you start seeing these correlations, and you see the advertising monster that we have in the media get behind the war for Iraq, and you'll see all these beautifully articulated computer generated images that show us this really exciting fighter planes and these incredible missiles, and it seems exciting. And there's a guy in Ethos who actually says we're supposed to get some kind of very vicarious pleasure from this war. So we're seeing the lines then from this powerful media, how that links in to the military industrial complex, how that links into how and they are, they're all corporations, by the way, big, massive, powerful ones, and how these things all link together, because there's a big interplay going on. You can't look at anything in isolation. You have to see the system as a whole and see how the spider's web or the tendrils link from one aspect of our lives into the other, because they really do. And when you look at it that way, it's more and more, you recognize patterns. It's more and more difficult to take it as a conspiracy. You're looking at logical through lines that we can see directly relate from one aspect and one area of our public lives to the other, in a very logical way. I'm not saying in a way that I enjoy. I don't like what's going on in our world, but I can see the logic of it given our present system. And our present system is capitalism. And a lot of people think it's given us great things, and maybe it has, but there's certainly a massive amount of moral and ethical difficulty when profit is the paramount objective. And for my money, I would say that's where the root of today's evil lies.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. That's well put, and it's funny because one of the first political bands I got into, because I was actually born in Portugal too, so I'm actually a foreigner myself, and but I was born in Portugal, so I'm a foreigner myself, so I know the perspective of kind of I talk to families from overseas, and I still go back regularly, and it does seem like people overseas have a in some sense, a good perspective or a good understanding of wars and conflicts, and because, like you said, maybe the history of it, and
Absolutely.
and one of the first political bands. It's funny you saying. I figured you're I believe you're from Dublin, right? And
Sure.
and
Yeah.
and one of the first political bands I got into growing up was this band called 1 Minute Silence, and they're from Ireland. And
All right.
and I was a huge fan of theirs. They're basically the Irish version of Rage Against the Machine,
Sure.
that type of
Sure.
style. And they're very politically driven. And then I was always, as I got older and I started understanding what their songs were about, and you just realize all the history in Ireland, and then you realize why such a good political band, and a lot of people from Ireland are very politically outspoken because of the fact that, like you said, you guys have seen the English Empire do a lot of harm in the world, including in your own country. And
Absolutely.
so
You know,
and Adam Curtis, it's funny you bring him up because I had I don't know if you know the journalists from Truth Loaders. They're from the UK. They do a bunch of videos online. They have a show online, and I had them on a couple months ago, and they're from the UK, and they kept bringing up Adam Curtis too, about check out his documentaries, and that was really one of the deciding factors on why they got into journalism, and gave them a whole
yeah.
different perspective. So it's funny because a lot of people in America don't know much about him, and then I started researching him, and I couldn't believe that I've never heard of this guy, and
Sure.
yeah. So you're definitely right about that. If there's some, definitely check out any stuff from Adam Curtis. He has some really thought provoking material. But and you're right about capitalism. I think capitalism is another issue where yeah, has it done some good? I can't say any system is completely flawed. I think that we use these isms, socialism, capitalism, all these type of labels, and then we just choose if we like it or don't. And every type of I guess system probably has some pros and cons, but we have to look at the fact that capitalism, for the most part, it is for profit. That's basically its only reason to exist, and the only way it keeps growing. And how many times are we going to keep raping one resource or another resource? Now fracking has gotten really popular, it's because it's become cheaper, and you have people, who are capitalists who believe that, oh, there's nothing wrong with fracking. It's like, well, it's causing earthquakes, and it's causing people's water to be flammable and making their house, creating a bomb out of their house. And how can you say that that's all right? And we're consuming so much, and I think that's another thing that you talked about in your film that was so important, that we consume so much where it just, do we really need all this stuff? And we just keep working jobs we hate to buy shit we don't need, and then it's just this vicious cycle. And we've been convinced that this is not respectful, but a correct way of living your life, that this is okay to just live your life buying shit. And I think the middle class gets screwed because there is a link between the middle class being very buying a lot of material stuff. And I think the reason it is because the middle class is screwed because we don't get the tax breaks or the best CPAs to pay very little to no taxes if we're a corporation, and we're not poor enough to get help from the government. So what do we do to kind of deal with our shitty jobs that we work 40 hours a week but we're still broke, which I think is crazy. I don't think anybody who works 40 hours a week should be broke and struggling, and so we buy stuff. We buy stuff to help us kind of get through our everyday lives, and that's a huge issue. And something that you talk about in your film, which I think is really important and something people haven't put in perspective, is the fact that we can control, because really all corporations care about is profit. And when that's the case, just the same way that gluten-free food has gotten popular, or the same way that, non-GMO foods have gotten popular, you see more of it. Why? Because it's profitable. People are going that way. So we can control things with, our purchasing power. And that's a theme that you get into a lot. Do you think that that's something that people don't realize? It's a way of protest. It's a way of getting a message across. Is with our instead of just talking, but we can actually provoke change by our purchasing power.
Yeah, it is powerful. Although it seems quite simple, but let me circle back on something here, if you don't mind, Ricky.
No, not at all.
I live in Los Angeles here, and I love America, and I love Americans. Not as a generality, I don't just love all Irish people, but I don't have. It's not as if I have an axe to grind. And sometimes when I'm speaking, I really don't want to alienate people. I don't want anyone to feel that I'm either America bashing or that's not my objective. But when you mentioned earlier about Europeans being slightly more engaged politically. There's a few things involved in how and why this system has been able to flourish over here. I'm out in Malibu right now, and it's a beautiful sunny day. And up until 1974, real wages, real pay in America increased on an annual basis. You could be a car worker in Detroit, and every year you could get a pay rise. Your wife didn't need to go out to work. You were getting a wage that kept pace with inflation. So your life was good. And America, from the 1820s through to about 1974, that was the case. America was flourishing for a lot of obvious reasons. There's a lot of great resources here and a lot of great minds, a lot of great people and great workers. This country flourished. Well, that changed in 1974. But prior to that, you didn't have to question what was going on in government. You didn't really have to. There were protests. There were massive protests around Vietnam and things. But the average man's life was fairly comfortable, and the average person's life was fairly comfortable. So it's only since the 70s this decline is set in. And I notice all the while now more and more people asking questions and getting involved because their life it's changed and people are beginning to suffer. So I wanted to put that in context. There's an area now in Camden, what's the name? Pine Ridge in Dakota, where the average lifespan of a male is now 49 years old. It's 69 in Iraq. So we can see that there's massive change happening in the underbelly of America, and yet none of that makes it to the media. It's only in areas where people are suffering that they're really beginning to ask these really difficult questions. So I wanted to preface what I was saying. I didn't want to say that Europeans are more engaged because they're smarter or anything. They've had to be more engaged, and the same thing's going to happen increasingly now in America. People are going to get more and more engaged, and I think it's natural to question every system. Yes, the wealthy in America have managed to convince the working class of America that socialism is tantamount to communism and is an evil. And so you'll see a working man today that's working 2 jobs, his wife's working 2 jobs, and they can't keep up, and they'll still turn their back on any idea that, anything that's considered ethical is almost socialism. It's curious how the machine works. It works really, really well. The average child, by the time they're 6 years old, they've seen millions and millions of commercials on TV that are designed to shape you, to program you into purchasing, to program your sense of morality. This is all background chatter that's all been going on all the while when people have been oblivious. Once people start seeing the cracks in the walls, then all of these other things become apparent. And I think, great documentaries like Adam Curtis, it spells out how they literally sat in a room and worked this stuff out. Edward Bernays is the guy that, I know you've seen the film, Edward Bernays was the guy that invented the term public relations. He was Freud's nephew. Freud was the guy with all the psychoanalysis background, So you have these great minds that are in the background of our lives, owning the media, putting out the message, keeping the status quo in order that big companies can keep raking in the profits. And that's part of capitalism. You wouldn't do that if that wasn't your priority, if that wasn't your objective.
Yeah.
So over to you.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And Edward Bernays, it's funny because he gets brought up a lot on this podcast because I think anybody who's done their research or learns about history or tries to figure out how we got here or how they, techniques they use to brainwash the public, social control, Edward Bernays' name always comes up. And he is one of the biggest influences on, the way that governments and media manipulates the information they give us, manipulates what we think. And most people, the average person doesn't know who he is. And like you said, they know his uncle better than they know him. And
absolutely.
And it's, he came up, he wrote the book Propaganda. He came up with public relations. I have a friend who his girlfriend is in public relations. And I'm like, oh, you know who Edward Bernays is? She's like, yeah, he's the one who created my field. I'm like, yeah, but do you know everything else he did? And,
sure.
They only know him as this, like, this, and it's crazy because, like you said, it's all well thought out. It's not by accident the way they phrase things. The way, you look at after September 11th, Code Red, Code Orange. Oh, now we have anthrax attacks. Yeah. That was all for the purpose of scaring people because when people are afraid, we're emotional creatures. We don't think logically when we're afraid, and then we'll be more likely to jump into a war that really isn't justified. I think it was like you even said in your film some ridiculous amount of a percentage of the population after September 11th and all these Code Reds and Code Oranges thought that Saddam had something to do with September 11th. Why? Because they just kept putting out these talking points like Saddam, possible, links to September 11th, and then everybody's afraid. So now everybody just, you're just getting these little talking points, not really realizing that they're blurring the line between opinion and fact. And next thing you know, they're molding our opinions, and then the whole U.S. is okay with going to Iraq, and then we look back and say, holy shit, there was no weapons of mass destruction. There's no reason to be there. How did they trick us? Well, they tricked us with these techniques they've been using forever, and I think these governments have been using these techniques. It isn't a modern technique. It's the same way Hitler used techniques like that, propaganda, and so propaganda has been a technique that governments have used throughout history. And when you look back at history, you see a history of propaganda and conspiracies, and now both those words are kind of tainted. And if you use them, you sound like a tinfoil hat loony, and I think that's kind of an issue. So when you researched for this movie, did you realize, or you probably already knew, but I tell people all the time, like when you research history, you find there's a lot more propaganda and conspiracy than mainstream media or I guess the standard idea of what conspiracy theory is or what propaganda is. And do you find that that's a hard thing to kind of get across to people, that once you start kind of talking to people about these things, that they kind of look at you like you're a conspiracy theorist and whatnot, and then it's like, well, just do your research. Like, conspiracy theory is not, our history is full of conspiracies. Regardless who killed JFK, somebody conspired to kill him. It doesn't matter if it was Oswald or if it was the FBI, CIA. It doesn't matter. So the thing is, they tainted the word or the term conspiracy theory. Now you say anything that doesn't, I guess, doesn't go along with the official.
Well, of course.
And do you find that that's the issue you run into?
Yes, a lot. And I'm always really careful in conversations with people because quite literally, I know I'm breaking down ideas that they were convinced were written in stone and were concrete and were true for all of their lives. and it's not an easy thing to do, and I don't actually like to do it. I don't like that look on someone's face when I can convince them of something completely contrary to what they believe, because it's like the floor falls out from underneath you. So I'm always, in a conversation with you, and I suspect your viewers, I'm happy to be wide open about it. But for the most part, I tread really, really carefully. And there's a lot of times I'll just back away from the conversation instead of getting involved. There's a good friend of mine. He's, I guess you'd call him really, really right wing. He works for a big TV news channel, and who's really, really right wing, and everybody would know who that channel is. I won't mention it. Privacy. So it's owned by an Australian. Anyway, he and I can get into it because his views are so I guess we call it right wing, even though I don't like the term. He's very conventional. It's whatever you hear on the news, that's what he believes. And whenever I question that, he's it throws him into tantrums. He gets so annoyed about it. It's always a great chase with somebody who can keep up and who's determined to have the conversation and have the debate. It's a lot of fun, but trying to find logical answers with people, trying to set things out logically with people, or appeal to their sense of reason. Anybody that loves capitalism, and everybody does, because the media's been telling you to love capitalism all your life. So if I say anything's wrong with capitalism, they immediately think I must be a communism. And this is like really old thinking for me, and it's holding us back. There are many more alternatives. If I don't like capitalism, that doesn't mean I'm a communist. But that's where that's the way the media frames the debate. It's told us it's either this or it's that. Everything's black and white in the media. Nothing has gray areas. Nothing has subtleties. When in fact, of all of our lives, they're very complex systems that are all interrelated.
Well, it's like yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just to finish up there, the conspiracy idea. Yes, of course. You'll notice that in other areas. All of a sudden, the word, if you say sustainable, now people think you're a tree hugger. This was about looking after the land and looking after the rivers, and that was a term that was broad. But now the idea of being an environmentalist means you must be sustainable. This is you're a tree hugger. You're on the left fringe somewhere. To take care of the planet is now demonized, and that's again part of the mill. If I can convince you to stop buying junk products because you're killing the planet, then that's going to take money out of some corporation's pocket, and they don't like that, and they're aware of. They monitor really, really closely what's going on in public trends. So they move quite quickly to try and align different positions. You'll see a lot of companies are trying to green themselves now. That's because they've recognized that flavor is in the buying public's mind. And so they'll try and make their products aligned with nature, and it's very cynical. It really is very cynical. Again, it goes back to just trying to make a dollar. And everybody, I guess, in this system wants to make a dollar. So that's the way the system is.
Yeah, and you hit on a very important point, the idea that they make everything a black and white issue. We've talked about this. Sure. where they do you have like the gun issue, where it's like one side tells you everybody should have a gun and it's safer, the other side tells you everybody should be taking their take their guns away. It's like, why can't we meet somewhere in between? Why does everything have to be a Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative type issue? And it's like it's a tricky little way of getting everybody against each other. It's
well, you limit the arguments. You limit the ability to actually give information out. If you can make an argument to either this or that, then you've limited the argument. To have a dogma, you have to be very, very simplistic. You can't get involved and engage in the gray issues and the complexities if you want a dogma. And our media churns out dogmas, so they don't want you thinking. They don't want analytic thinking. It's just an emotional choice. And keep it simple. Keep it simple for the public. The public, they think, just clearly define the issue. And every one of our issues are really complex. They're not simple things, but that's the way the media wants it. And sound bites. If a politician gets up and talks in detail about an issue, the very next day the media will say, what a waffler. The guy talks and talks for hours and doesn't say anything. And the public will buy that because they're used to things like the advertiser man gives it to you. A nice little bite-sized chunk that's easy to get and there couldn't be anything more to think about than that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and that's what happens is that most people. I mean, well, I feel like now there is, I guess for lack of a better term, like awakening. I feel like because of our access to information, we can easily share information quicker. It seems like the younger generation is they're kind of going away from CNN and the Fox News and the MSNBCs and the mainstream media, and
Yeah.
and they're we can we can kind of protest our issues online and share them and all that stuff. So I think that we are going towards the right direction in some sense. It seems like. I mean, I could be wrong, but maybe it's just me looking at it, the glass half full. But it seems like there's, the nice thing about, we can watch documentaries on YouTube, we can go on Netflix, we can, listen to podcasts, and we're exposed to more information. And I think that it's a matter of time before, people start realizing, like, holy shit, like, we've been tricked, or there's more to this than just meets the eye, and they're selling us talking points. And I mean, you look at CNN, for example, with all the news that's going on in the world, they did 2 weeks of a plane that they barely have gotten any more information today than they had, 2 weeks ago.
Sure.
And it's just like why they did it for ratings. Amber Lyon was this whistleblower that worked for CNN, who did a documentary on, or wanted to do a documentary on Bahrain, went there, got arrested, like risked her life, and then they wouldn't release it. Why? They were getting money from Bahrain, and then she quit. And people don't realize that on these shows, as much as they want you to believe that there's a debate going on and they're actually having conversation, they can't have the same conversation you and me are having, or the just freedom to talk and say our opinions. There's guidelines to what they can and cannot say,
Absolutely.
And
it's really well documented how they vet the speakers. Yeah.
So I mean, that's a huge issue, and I think eventually, as information gets easier to share, and I hope that we're going towards the right direction. I feel like online, with so many alternative news websites popping up, weekly, and so many people sharing what's really going on, it's a little harder to be fooled. Do you feel, are you positive about the future, or what do you think?
I guess I might not be in the best position to judge in some regards. The last 2 films I put out were documentaries that both dealt with difficult issues, like Ethos. Red Rain is another documentary I put out that looks at organ harvesting of fallen Gong people in China. So because I'm a filmmaker and I have websites that have these films on, I get that communication tunnel backwards and forwards from the public. And in general, I'm very optimistic as a person, and I'm optimistic, as you pointed out, there's more and more sources of information out there, and people do seem to be finding themselves discovering it, moving towards it. The people are asking more questions. I think the reasons for that, sadly, may catch up with us before enough people are tuned in and turned on. People are more and more concerned about unemployment, about their difficult lives, working 2 and 3 jobs to keep up. People are really concerned about the environment. People are more and more concerned about these endless wars and this war on terror and the NSA spying on us. So there's plenty of reasons for people to be concerned, and that generally drives people to ask questions. So you're looking at, on the one hand, people asking questions. Have they just begun? Down through the centuries, this information has been there. Now it's proliferated. People have more and more access, and you have to think that's going to be a good thing. I just hope enough people get enough access and come to these questions quickly, because we're seeing more and more moves toward legislation that's going to limit people's ability to react to this information. And of course, we're seeing more and more degradation of the environment, and the continuation of these wars. Look what's going on now in the Ukraine. For my money, these are proxy wars that are happening in Syria, in the Ukraine. And if you're a conspiracy theorist, you could easily come to the assumption that they're pushing for a third world war, and all the pieces are there. And this is the way every war has started in the past. With trade sanctions. These are all the chess moves that lead to armed conflict, I'm really concerned about that.
Yeah, it seems like it. I actually was watching a little bit of the Obama speech at the EU this afternoon, and it is so surprising how they can just how politicians are such good liars. I mean, he's on stage telling everybody that like what Russia did was wrong and we shouldn't invade countries, and I'm just like, what is this guy like? What is he saying? And then he's like, it's not similar to. He said it's not similar to Iraq. I'm like, yeah, because the only the differences are some people in Ukraine actually want to be a part of Russia. Nobody in Iraq wanted to be a part of the U.S. We have no links to Iraq. I mean, to say, and then he said that we didn't go to Iraq for natural resources or whatnot. And it's like, well, then I'd like to know why you went there, because the country's worse today than it ever was. And then the only people who made money out of it were private corporations like the Halliburtons and KBRs and so it's just it's insane. And I hope, similar to Syria, I hope that people look at what the government is trying to sell and actually stand up, because it seems like the Syrian thing was like, if that was a win for I think the people, because I think they tried really hard for a month or so to sell us on the Syrian war. Then all of a sudden they're like, okay, we're not going to win this. Like 99% of the people don't want to go there, don't know what's going on, and don't want to go to another war. And then they actually, they pulled away from that. So, I hope the same thing happens in Russia. What do you think? Just your personal opinion. What do you think the motive is to even poke a beer like Russia and possibly cause a nuclear war, which just seems insane. I mean, is it just for, like you said, the military-industrial complex to get into another war to make money?
Well, it would be very difficult from my position to actually nail down the truth of what's going on, but we can make conjecture, probably based on history. We can try and stretch those through lines forward. If we look backwards, we can see what's happened before and why it's happened. Generally, we can get the truth afterwards. For my part, there's any number of theories here at play. One of the probably the leading one is that Russia was on its knees after the war, after the Berlin Wall came down, and the Europeans and NATO, or the West, if we'll call it the West, made big encroachments in what used to be part of the former USSR, in Georgia and Tajikistan, all of those countries that border Europe, and they invited them to join NATO. Well, Russia has managed to get itself back on its feet. It's found massive oil reserves and gas reserves. It's a very wealthy and very powerful nation again. And yet NATO is still pushing up against its borders. And you might imagine that Russian leaders would not like that. When we look at if we imagine ourselves as Russia, that was brought to its knees, trying to keep up with an arms race with the West. Now that they have wealth, you can see how stubborn they would be, and it could lead to war. It could really lead to war. I hope it doesn't. It's hard to imagine, because we're looking at a situation now where both sides have lots of nuclear weapons, and you'd have to be a wild conspiracy theorist to think, okay, they're pushing for this war because they want to depopulate the world, because that's what's going to happen if they get this war.
Absolutely.
The other side is that they will push backwards and forwards and keep pushing backwards and forwards while they try and make accommodations and encroachments. But it's on record. The America was financing so many projects in the Ukraine. They were really gaining influence in the Ukraine. They were supporting right-wing militants who were agitating against Russia and trying to move the country into the European bloc. This is all documented. So we know there's interference going on, but we know it's happened before, and that's the main thing. When you know it's happened before and you've seen the evidence of it, it's not difficult to recognize the patterns when it's happening again. And that's one of the most important things. History is not taught very much over here in the schools. One of the best books about how America came to be was written by Howard Zinn, that I actually dedicated the film to.
Yeah.
Called A People's History of the United States. And when I've directed people to read that book, they've come back to me and they've said, is this true? Is this true? All of the fallacies we have around our whole society, the birth. We imagine it was the Pilgrims, and it wasn't the very wealthy men of Europe that came out here to rape this new land, which was what the truth of it was. It's not difficult to believe that when you recognize that that's what Europeans were doing all over the world anyway.
Oh yeah, and that Howard Zinn book is so important, and he
must read.
He was a huge influence on a lot of people that have been on this show, and it's just if there's one book that people should read, definitely check that out. Also, I started watching the Oliver Stone, The Untold History of the United States, which is another really great, I guess for we talked about before we went on the air, 2014. Not many people read it anymore. So if somebody wants to watch something, they can check that out. And like you said, it's so important to understand that history repeats, and it's not just a cliche term that people use over and over again. Once you start doing your research, you realize like, holy shit, like everything. It just seems. I mean, you just put a different empire in, or but basically it's been the same type of situations. And it's funny because you look at history and you look at like some of the greatest minds and the founding fathers and some of the quotes like don't whoever was it, Franklin, who said don't ever sacrifice freedom for securities, you'll gain neither and lose both. Like those type of quotes, like they make just as much sense today as they did back then. Even old movies. One of my favorite movies, Network, from the 70s, and great film, and it's just as relevant today as it was then. And so it's just like one thing we realize, even though technology is different, instead of us talking face to face over some drinks, at dinner, we're talking through Skype, but really are the way the techniques people use to manipulate people, the people in power trying to stay in power, people trying to profit. All these things are very much similar, and when you research history, not a lot has changed. So
no, I mean you can go all the way back to Plato and Aristotle and the other philosophers and read their work, and these are guys that were writing supposedly 500 years before Christ was supposed to have been born. So this is a long while ago, and the conversations they have and the things they talk about are all completely relevant today. It's interesting how little we've changed. Technology has, of course, but human aspirations, greed, none of these things have changed very much. We haven't developed an awful lot in that regard. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Like our surroundings have changed, and the technology we use has changed, but us as people have not changed much at all. And you're right. Like looking back and reading those those philosophies and just kind of asking those questions again, I think that's so important. One of my favorite philosophers of our time is Michael Sandel, who wrote the book Justice, and he's from Harvard, and he makes us ask the question, what is a market? What's the purpose of a market? Because a lot of capitalists believe that it's a market's a good thing and whatnot. But he had this quote where he says we went from a market economy to a market society, and where everything's for sale now. Where before market was just this thing that it was just a system we used to kind of make things fair, and to kind of you could buy stuff and you could give people opportunities. But now we've gone to a point where everything's for sale. Our information, what thing I click on, the information of me clicking on something on Facebook is sold to some marketer who now knows what I'm looking for, and now it sells me an ad and puts out an ad to sell me this product. So it's just like everything's for sale. And when do we stop? We only have this earth to live on. We don't have another option. So it's just like, shouldn't our concern be Fukushima? Shouldn't our concern be making sure these oil spills don't happen as best as our capabilities? And not everything should be for sale and rape resources just because it's profitable, and then say, let's move on to the next thing. It's just like we have to look at our kids, grandkids, the history of this earth, and who knows what effects, and even the global warming thing. I've gotten a lot of debates about the global warming thing, and similar, like you said, like they get these talking points. Anybody who's a conservative is going to tell you global warming is bullshit, and then if you believe in global warming, then all of a sudden you're a tree hugger, and it's just like, why is it one or the other? Why can't we just say, hey, most scientists say that humans have absolutely had an effect on basically weather and ice melting, and why? And even if there's 1% that they might be right, shouldn't we look into it and do something before it's too late? Because it's not like it's something we can just reverse, overnight. So
I think every responsible adult should recognize that pollution on any level, given that we only have one planet, is wrong. And that's where the debate should be. Should we force corporations to clean up the mess they make when they derive so much profit from the Earth's resources that they claim and sell to us? Where is the point of the debate? And people can't get there while they're arguing. Is it global warming? Is it climate change? Have we made a difference? Have we not? The question should simply be: we should not be polluting the one planet we live on.
Yeah.
That's where the debate should be. I mean, and I'm sure you agree. And I love your passion around this, and I'm eternally grateful for you for making this kind of media, making these podcasts, trying to keep these conversations going, because that's where change happens. You have to, the ideology, you have to win the ideological battle. People have to know that there's something wrong, and then find a way to engage with that problem. Because they are framing the debate. Yes, I am. They would call me a tree hugger. I've never. Well, there was that one time, but listen, let's not go there. But that's how they frame the debate. It's how they keep pouring out their bullshit, if I'm allowed to say that.
You can swear. Absolutely. And that's how they dismiss you. They dismiss you. They just call you a tree hugger, and then they're basically their ears turn off and they stop listening because they're just like, oh, you weren't, And so
it's also divide and conquer, isn't it? If you got me arguing, and this also helps them. If Dick Cheney is a war criminal, nobody who's Republican wants to own up because he was on their team supposedly, so they'll defend him even when it's so bloody blatantly true that he made billions of dollars out of the Iraq War and other conflicts. But they have to support their man. They feel like he's on their team because they vote Republican, and so they're not even prepared to admit the mistakes of their own team players.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's
absolutely. And you look back, and that's so true because it's like Republicans will bash Democrats will bash Republicans, but at the end of the day, they all have skeletons in the closets. They've all have fucked up. They've all have done corrupt things. I mean, I remember growing up.
They golf together.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's one of those things where Jesse Ventura once said, and I think it's probably something that people should look into and really push for. And that's not putting Republican or Democrat, not letting you know which one is which on the ballot. Because and then just let people look into the idea. Their ideas and their theories and their philosophies. And because what happens is, like you said, people pick teams, and once you pick that team, you're screwed, because now you're basically, if you consider yourself a Republican, you're just going to vote for the Republican. I mean, that's why even bother. I think and they're never going to be, or at least they're trying to suppress a third party, which I think is so important, because I think that until then, or until we get a third party, they're just going to keep making us feel like we have options by. And your movie showed it, that you had Bush and Gore or whoever you compared, and it was one of these things where just like you realize that their policies aren't much different. I mean, look at Obama. You make him white and gray here, and he's a Republican. I mean, he look at his policies. He re-signed the Patriot Act. He signed the NDAA Act. He's trying to start war with Russia. It seems he wanted to go into Syria. That sounds like a Republican to me. That sounds like Bush, if you ask me. So do we really have a choice? Or are they just pretending we have options? And if like you said, is everybody just the same?
Well, I guess two political parties, that's just one more than a dictatorship, right?
Yeah, you're right.
All right. So, the idea of having, I'm not sure if you want to get into trying to discuss what would be a better system, but because, I'm working on the next film, the follow-up to Ethos. And of course, while it seems simplistic, how you spend your money is really powerful. It does make a tremendous difference. And when you think about it, you see how effective that can be. But the important thing for me when I'm making a film is I wanted to be able to give people something they could do so they could get involved, because I feel people have a sense that people feel disenfranchised, they feel hopeless, they throw their hands in the air and walk away in dismay when they look at what we've got. And so they don't engage in it. And I think it's really important to get people engaged. And so while I'm working on this next film, I'm developing some of the other themes that are in Ethos. But then I'm thinking, well, where do I want to draw people's attention to this fight? What do I want to give them that they could actually fight for? And of course, it's a really, really very simple thing at the end of the day. We don't actually have a democracy. And I think if we could fight for a democracy and get money out of politics and get self-interest out of politics, I think democracy is what we should be aiming for. And of course, we'd have to open the door to more parties.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think money out of politics would be a huge step forward.
Yeah.
I mean, money corrupts everything. I love how you talk to somebody who's I mean, and don't get me wrong, I agree with a lot of libertarian views. And the last time, if I got to vote for a president, last time people were running, I would have voted for Ron Paul. So if he definitely was the best option. So, but the thing is,
So,
it does scare me when people believe that the issue is government, and if you take away government, then markets will control themselves or regulate
oh, it's
themselves.
terrifying.
Yeah, I mean the markets. I mean corporations use government to basically cheat, steal, and make profit, and they'll. If there's no government, they'll just find other ways to do it. So it's not, and they do. I mean, they like we talked about. Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays. You look at like all these ways to manipulate the mind and marketing and I had a friend who basically didn't let his kids watch any TV besides Netflix or what he was letting them watch, and they would drive by a Mickey D's and his kids would be fine, and the kids of his friends' kids would be going crazy like, oh, let's go to McDonald's. It's marketing. It's all
Sure.
that. So it's just like they find other ways to sell us stuff, and so it's not like, I mean, I think what people don't realize is the way they sell us, how something makes us feel compared to what we need. It's like they don't sell us a Cadillac because it has great handling or anymore. Now they sell us a Cadillac because a guy in a suit drives it and he looks successful, and so we want that
Sure.
feeling. So it's corporations will find ways to manipulate people. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if we took or money out of politics, it would be a great change and a great step in the right direction. I just think that, how do we do that? How,
But
lobbyists.
yeah, there are organizations out there that are, that are fighting for exactly that kind of thing. Ethos has a Facebook page, and every time there's a worthy piece of news or a worthy organization doing something, I always post that and try and drive the numbers toward these organizations that are working towards these things. And they will respond when there is enough pressure. When there's enough pressure, they do respond. Absolutely. Give you the example of Nike. Nike were caught operating sweatshops some years ago, and over the coming 6 months, their stock price dropped 60%, and so they changed instantly. So when pressure is exerted, things do change, and it's important that people recognize that. But this, it's not an idea that's propagated in the media, and it's difficult when you think of all of our, most of our champions have been shot. There's plenty of reasons that people wouldn't want to go out and protest because they get, hit with a billy club or tear gas. We all saw the images from the World Trade talks where with the coppers in Seattle pepper spraying people right in the face. It's kind of scary to get involved on some levels. But I think, people being aware, just the awareness itself shifts and change, because they tend to take the longer look at these purported politicians. On that point, they at this stage, the politicians and the corporations are integrated. It's all one force. They come from and go back to the corporations and the banks. It's it's a revolving door, and the same is true with the military-industrial complex. When John McCain finishes his work at the White House, he'll go and he'll be sitting on the board for Northrop Grumman, getting a massive paycheck. So the way that system supports itself and regenerates itself is by infiltrating all of the aspects of our public life. So it's very difficult to separate one from the other. They really are integrated.
Yeah.
Uh,
The
so
story of the Fed is a perfect example of it too. Private bankers of controlling
sure,
inflation, and
sure.
everybody assumes the Fed is a federal government type
Yeah,
agency, and
because
it's
it's so fed. Yeah,
yeah. it's no different than FedEx. It's bullshit. And like you had was Edward Griffin in your documentary, which is his book,
Sure.
The Creatures from Jekyll Island, is a great
Yeah.
book about that
Yeah.
whole, people call it a conspiracy. It wasn't a conspiracy. I mean, they wrote this, the Federal Reserve Act on Jekyll
They
Island,
wrote the bill.
a bunch of
Yeah.
bankers, and then what was it? They backed a
They
Wilson.
financed Woodrow Wilson.
Yep.
They backed his election campaign and got him into power. On the condition that he would sign that act. And of course, there were probably three other central banks before our current system that collapsed. And there's been a couple of incidents throughout history. I mean, one of the reasons we can look at a way to look at the JFK assassination. About 6 months before he was killed, he signed an executive order, EO. I think it was 00001, I think is the number of it. But you can find it quick enough online. That would have allowed the government to print money based on the country's silver reserves. And 6 months later, he's dead.
Well, he did, didn't he? Didn't he have like silver notes or something like that he was
Sure.
putting in circulation?
Yeah, and he was moving towards that. That it's always about money. Syria, Gaddafi was about to start printing gold currency called the dinar. That was going to be a Pan-African currency for trading oil in. 6 months later, the troops are on the ground in Syria. Saddam Hussein, he wanted to start trading his oil in euros or another currency, and actually started trading his oil in euros. 6 months later, they're in Iraq. You can't mess around with these people. These are the most powerful people on the planet. They own everything. They own the CIA. If you look at the heads of the CIA from its inception back in 1947, I think, most of the heads of the CIA came from and went back to Wall Street. The CIA is owned and operated by the banks. It's all on record.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing about conspiracy theories is that people don't realize that all the dots are there. You just have to connect them, and then there's something people. I think like you said earlier in the show, the idea that if you tell people all this information, you just turn their whole life upside down. Like everything that they thought was reality, that was real. And I think that the first reaction is denial. People want to deny it. I mean, I get in conversations about September 11th, about I even the same thing about I had the same theory that Gaddafi wanted to use a different currency, Saddam wanted to use a different currency. The only thing that keeps our currency with any value, because we don't export shit. We import we import way more than we everything comes from China or Korea or whatever, and we don't export anything. So the only thing that keeps our dollar having any value is the fact that other countries are forced to have to use the dollar to buy and trade stuff and oil and stuff. So anytime somebody gets in the way of that, like Gaddafi or Saddam, of course it's a huge issue, and they have to put an end to it. And
Absolutely.
So that is scary as hell. And the thing is that the way I look at it is that if the government could have a hand in killing our president, then you can guarantee, they would do other things to stay in power. And the CIA has links to the Bush Sr., who was a part of the CIA and then became president. How crazy is that? I mean, a head of the CIA became president. So it just, people have to, and like you said, when you do your research, when you start connecting these dots, you realize these aren't just conspiracy theories. These are actual theories with actual facts to back them up, and
yeah.
So that's really important. Well, I don't want to hold you up anymore, Pete. I know you're a busy man, and I really appreciate the time you took to be with me today and have this awesome conversation. And time flew by because when you're talking about stuff you're passionate about, I think it's easy to kind of lose track a little bit. But any upcoming work or anything that you want to say to the listeners, anything to check out? I already said definitely check out Ethos. It's on Netflix. It has Woody Harrelson in it. If you don't watch for any other reason, watch it because you're a fan of his, and hopefully you get some information out of it. And which was a great way of getting that movie exposed. Because I'll tell people to watch it. And then I'll be like, oh, Woody's in it. They're like, oh, I love Woody. I'll check it out. And then I get people to watch it. So I think that's star power helps a little bit. So if you can use that to get a message across, that's awesome. And it's awesome that Woody actually is in the movie and seems passionate also about it. So that's a really cool thing. But I know he was influenced by Howard Zinn too, right?
Absolutely, they were big friends. Yeah, hats off to Woody for stepping up to the plate and presenting the film. Absolutely, and big thanks to you for bringing some more attention to it. Again, it says in the film, keep an open mind, but question everything. It's very difficult when you come to a subject that. The idea that 9/11 was an inside job. That's if you can believe that that's the truth. What does that do to your house of cards? It's a very difficult place to go, but you're a responsible human being in this world, and the assumption is most of us, we've got kids, but we're going to bring kids into this world. We have to play an active part. Voting once every 4 years isn't an active part. You've got to get involved, get educated, ask questions. Thanks, Ricky.
Hey, thanks, Pete. Thanks so much for being with us. And can you release the name of the film you're working on, or is that still secret for now?
Yeah, right now its working title is Ethos 2.
Ethos. Okay.
Ethos 2. Yeah.
Any idea when?
You guys should look out for another film I just produced called Red Rain, which looks at what's going on in China with the fallen gong. That's another good film you guys should look out for.
Yeah.
But find your way to the website. There's an Ethos website, ethosdocumentary.com. Find your way there. There's a debate going on there. There's places for people to write comments, and the Facebook page is also another good forum for these conversations.
Yeah.
And, get involved, people. There's things happening in your world. It's your world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say that the reason why this podcast is called The Ripple Effect, because I'm trying to let people or help people understand that we can make a difference, even if it's just as little, like you said, as writing a comment, sharing a news article, sharing a documentary, sparking conversation. All these things can lead to bigger things. And I think Howard Zinn had a quote about that. It's similar to that theory, the idea that one person can make a difference. And I think we have to believe that. I think that too often we believe we can't make a difference, so we don't attempt to. And it's just something this podcast was just an idea, sometime last year, and now I get to have conversations with filmmakers that I'm a huge fan of their works, like you, and this, and now and I hope that I get to spark thought and conversation. And I know a lot of people that have touched bases with me have I've opened up some perspectives that they haven't looked at or whatnot. So it's just like, even if you do that little part, just spark thought, spark a conversation, you're doing something, and doing something is better than doing nothing.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks, Pete. Hey, enjoy the rest of your day. And like I said, I really appreciate you being with us today. And
Rick, you're very welcome.
I'll be looking out for Ethos too. Hopefully, we'll have you on again once that movie comes out.
Sure. Look forward to it.
Hey, thanks, Pete. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.